Okay, so we're getting now into what is really organic chemistry, and I find myself almost giddy thinking about what's coming up. I guess it's not that I love chemistry as much as I love learning or solving puzzles, or I will tell you there's some beautiful, beautiful things we're going to see over the next several chapters. So I brought back out this table. You've seen this table before. Brought this back out to remind you that we are doing functional groups, okay? So one functional group, for example, is an alkyne. It's a triple bond. An example of that is 1-butyne. But here's the real point. Chapter 9 is dedicated to alkynes, right? So you're learning this stuff now. You're being exposed to it now. And it may seem like, oh my goodness, I have all these things I've got to learn. I will tell you, this is an overview of the whole topic of organic chemistry. This is beautiful. So in chapter 4, we're going to be doing things like alkanes, which might look like that. Basically, it's just carbons and hydrogens. That's chapter 4. In chapter 5 and 6 are given to another topic, right? So it's more background stuff in chapter 5 and 6. But chapter 7 is alkenes. No, it's not. I'm wrong about that. Chapter 8 is alkenes. Chapter 7 is alkyl halides, right? And chapter 8 is alkenes. And chapter 9 is alkanes, right? Chapter 10, I don't remember what chapter 10 is, but you can see chapter 12 is alcohols, okay? So, and this is another thing that's really cool. When we're doing this, if you can see sort of the big picture, it's just going to be much easier for you. When we're doing this, we're going to go each chapter, we're going to start out with an introduction to the functional group, naming, how to name them, right? Which, by the way, is not an arbitrary skill. It's actually going to help us understand the stuff because the naming is always systematic. And so it's going to force your eyeballs to look at the molecule and look at every aspect of it in order to name it. And if you learn naming early, it just turns out to be sort of the same old thing over and over again, right? So you're introduced to a functional group, you learn how to name it, and then you learn reactions for it, okay? So to me, very exciting. To you, I don't know, of course. I don't remember where I was when I was in this same situation. The first time I took organic chemistry, I was not doing well, and the second time I was, and I don't think I got the big picture when I was first starting out. So this is the big picture. Now, let's go to our first functional group, which is alkanes. Okay, that's what we're doing in this chapter. But before we actually talk about alkanes per se, we're going to first of all remind you what hydrocarbons are. Hydrocarbons are composed of hydrogen and carbon, of course, okay? So if you have a double bond in there, it's an alkene. If you have a triple bond in there, it's an alkyne. If you have something like a series of triple bonds, it's aromatic. If it's this kind of a series, okay, it's aromatic. And it turns out if you have nothing in it except carbons and hydrogens, no features whatsoever, then it's an alkane, okay? So alkanes have basically no features, right? You see that? I mean, they're just carbons and hydrogens, no double bonds, no single bonds, no oxygens, no nitrogens, no nothing, okay? Now, they're said to be saturated because they have as many hydrogens in there as you possibly can have, right? In other words, the carbons have all their bonds are satisfied either by bonds with another carbon or a hydrogen, but they're all single bonds. That is saturated. Unsaturated means we don't have as much hydrogen in there, right? Can you see that if I got rid of one of these bonds and put another hydrogen on there, I just got 2 more hydrogens in there, right? And so it's unsaturated if we have double bonds or triple bonds. And the reason is by saturated or unsaturated, we mean do you have as much hydrogen in there as you can. So we would say saturated means unsaturated. I'm going to put a little footnote here with hydrogens. That's really what saturated means. Saturated means you've got as many hydrogens in there as you possibly can have. So this is sort of like a very brief introduction to alkanes. Let me give you one last thing before we move on. it's important to appreciate, while we're going to look at how to name alkanes, it's important to appreciate it's important to appreciate that we are going to come across compounds that have names that are named what they're named just because that's what everybody's always called them. Those are called common names. For example, formic acid is not named via the rules that we're going to use here. We have to memorize that name. That's formic acid. It's isolated from ants, named after the Latin word for ant, which means formic, which is formica. And there you go. It comes from the ant venom. And so, why is it called formic acid? Just because everybody always called it formic acid. That can be maddening to students in the beginning, but I think if you have the patience to get your head into organic chemistry, you'll see that, of course, there's common names. There's things. We don't call everything like water. We don't call that dihydrogen oxide because we've been calling water for thousands of years, right? So these are you have to be advised you're going to come across some compounds with common names, and we just have to patiently file that to the side. My recommendation is you make one sheet, not a bunch of sheets, one sheet of things that are arbitrary, things that you just have to memorize. And as those things become familiar to you, you take them off of that sheet and you rewrite the sheet without that thing on. For example, that H2O is called water. You wouldn't put that on there because it's a common name and you're just so familiar with it, it would be a waste of your space on the paper, right? But that formic acid is called formic acid, that maybe should go on there. We won't, by the way, study formic acid until Organic 2. Sorry for the background noise. I'm sitting by a beautiful open window. So I wouldn't put formic acid on there right now, but it's things like that you would want to put on there. All right, so welcome to Organic Chemistry. Hang on for the ride. I hope it's as delightful for you as it has been for me.